Millionaire father, disguised as an Uber driver, takes his own wife, what she confesses during the ride. Before we get into it, if this video found you at the right moment, let me know with your favorite emoji. The rain hammered against the windshield of the black Honda Accord as Michael Richardson adjusted his baseball cap lower over his eyes. At 32, he'd built a tech empire worth $47 million. But tonight he was just another Uber driver in downtown Chicago. The fake mustache itched against his upper lip, and the borrowed jacket smelled of cigarettes from the costume shop where he'd spent $200 creating this elaborate disguise. "This is absolutely insane," he whispered to himself, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. 3 months of marriage counseling with Dr. Peterson hadn't worked. Sarah, his wife of 8 years, remained distant and cold, speaking to him only when absolutely necessary about household logistics or social obligations. Their conversations had become transactional, devoid of the warmth and intimacy that had once defined their relationship. Tonight he would finally discover the truth behind her emotional withdrawal. His phone buzzed with a notification, a ride request from Millennium Park to Oak Brook, Sarah's monthly book club location at the exclusive country club where Chicago's elite wives gathered to discuss literature and share carefully curated versions of their lives. His heart pounded violently as he accepted the ride, knowing this was his wife requesting transportation. Through careful manipulation of their shared digital calendar and orchestrating a fake emergency at his tech company's headquarters, he'd ensured Sarah believed he was in New York on crucial business. She had no idea her husband was about to become her confessor. 25 minutes later, he pulled up to their lakefront penthouse building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that had cost him $12 million 3 years ago. The uniformed doorman nodded politely, completely unrecognizing the man who actually owned the entire building and employed him indirectly through property management companies. Michael's hands trembled uncontrollably as he watched Sarah emerge from their private elevator, elegant and sophisticated in her navy Armani dress, her blonde hair catching the amber streetlight. She'd lost at least 15 pounds recently, something he'd noticed during their increasingly rare shared meals, but had never found the courage to address directly. "Good evening," she said politely, sliding gracefully into the back seat. Her voice carried a bone-deep exhaustion he'd never heard before, a weariness that seemed to emanate from her very soul. "Evening, ma'am. Oak Brook Country Club. Correct?" Michael deepened his voice considerably, adding a slight working-class Chicago accent he'd practiced obsessively for weeks in preparation for this moment. As they pulled away from their building and merged into the heavy evening traffic, Sarah leaned back against the leather seat and closed her eyes. "God, what a absolutely terrible day," she murmured to herself, apparently feeling safe enough with this anonymous driver to voice her private thoughts. Michael's grip tightened painfully on the steering wheel. In 8 years of marriage, she'd stopped sharing her daily struggles with him entirely. When exactly had they stopped talking about anything meaningful? When had she stopped seeing him as someone worth confiding in? Someone who might actually care about her inner world? "Rough day at the architectural firm?" he asked carefully, keeping his voice neutral and professional. Sarah laughed bitterly, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Work? No, my work is actually fine. The Peterson renovation project is progressing beautifully. It's absolutely everything else in my personal life that's completely falling apart at the seams." The traffic light turned red, and Michael found himself holding his breath, terrified of what revelations might come next, yet desperate to finally understand the woman he'd loved for over a decade. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said quickly, catching herself mid-confession. "I really shouldn't be dumping my personal problems on you like this. You're just trying to do your job and earn a living. The last thing you need is some privileged woman complaining about her first-world problems. Please don't apologize." "Ma'am, sometimes talking to a complete stranger actually helps more than talking to people who know you," Michael replied carefully, his heart absolutely breaking at being called a stranger by his own wife, the woman who'd once shared every thought and dream with him. Sarah remained quiet for several city blocks, staring pensively through the rain-streaked windows at Chicago's glittering downtown skyline, watching the lives of thousands of other people playing out in illuminated office buildings and apartment windows. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again. "Do you believe in true love, driver? I mean, really believe in it? The kind that lasts forever, that survives everything life throws at you?" The deeply personal question hit Michael like a physical blow to his chest. Yes, ma'am, I absolutely do believe in it. I used to believe in it too," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain and traffic noise. "I used to believe in fairy tales, and happily ever after, and all those beautiful romantic notions. I married my college sweetheart when I was 21, thought we'd conquered the entire world together, that we were invincible as a team." Michael adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, desperate for glimpses of Sarah's face as she spoke. She looked significantly older than her 29 years, worn down by some invisible weight he'd completely failed to recognize or address. He was brilliant, incredibly ambitious, everything I thought I wanted in a life partner, she continued, her voice taking on a dreamy, nostalgic quality. "We had these amazing plans. We'd build successful careers, travel the world, raise beautiful children, grow old together in rocking chairs on some perfect front porch." Michael's hands were shaking now as he navigated through the evening traffic. Every word felt like a knife twist, revealing how completely he'd destroyed their shared dreams. "But success changes people in ways you never expect," Sarah said, her tone shifting to something harder, more bitter. "The money, the constant pressure, the endless business travel, the phone calls at all hours. He became someone I don't even recognize anymore. We live in this incredible penthouse that most people only see in magazines, drive cars that cost more than most people's houses, eat at restaurants with 3-month waiting lists." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts before delivering what felt like a final verdict. "But we're complete strangers now. We're two people who happen to share the same address and the same last name, but we might as well be living on different planets. I can't remember the last time we had a real conversation about anything that actually mattered." "Have you tried talking to him directly about how you feel?" Michael managed to ask, though his voice sounded strained even to his own ears. Sarah laughed again, but this time the sound contained equal parts pain and resignation. "Talk? We don't talk anymore. We schedule brief conversations between his important business meetings and my architectural consultations. Even our marriage counselor basically told us last week that we're just going through the motions of trying to save something that might already be dead." They were approaching the halfway point to Oak Brook when Sarah's iPhone rang loudly, the sound cutting through the heavy atmosphere in the car. Michael watched in the rearview mirror as she glanced at the screen, her expression immediately hardening when she saw the caller identification, and then deliberately declined the call without hesitation. "Your husband calling?" he asked, though he already knew the answer since it was his own number she'd just rejected. "Yes, probably calling from his luxury hotel room in Manhattan to check another box on his good husband responsibility list," she replied, her voice absolutely dripping with resentment that Michael had never heard directed at him before tonight. "He does this every business trip, calls at exactly the same time, asks the same generic questions about my day, tells me he misses me in the same rehearsed tone." The phone rang again immediately. Again she declined it without even considering answering. "You know what the absolute worst part of all this is?" Sarah said, apparently needing to voice thoughts she'd kept buried deep inside for months or maybe years. "I don't think he actually loves me anymore as a person. I think he loves the idea of me, the successful, attractive wife who looks perfect at his company events and doesn't cause embarrassing scenes or make unreasonable demands on his precious time." Michael's vision blurred momentarily as tears threatened to fall. He'd called because he genuinely missed her voice, because even surrounded by important business associates and potential investors in Manhattan, he felt completely lonely and disconnected without hearing from her. But she interpreted his reaching out as mere obligation, as performance theater. "When did you first realize it?" he asked, absolutely dreading the answer but needing to know. "When did you know for certain that the love was gone?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Michael began to wonder if she'd decided not to answer such a personal question from a stranger. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the Honda's engine and the steady rhythm of rain against glass. 6 months ago, on our 8th wedding anniversary, he took me to Alinea, you know, that incredibly expensive restaurant where you need connections just to get a reservation. I thought maybe he was finally making an effort to reconnect with me, to celebrate what we'd built together. Michael remembered that evening with crystal clarity, but apparently from a completely different perspective than his wife. We'd been seated for maybe 20 minutes when his phone rang with what he called an emergency about server maintenance issues. He spent the next 45 minutes pacing outside the restaurant, shouting instructions at his technical team while our 7-course tasting menu sat getting cold on the table. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more bitter as she continued. "I sat there alone, watching other couples laugh and hold hands and actually talk to each other, and I realized with absolute certainty that I was completely invisible to the man I'd married. I was just an expensive accessory, something decorative to fill the other chair at important dinners. Michael pulled onto the highway shoulder, claiming car trouble while he processed this devastating revelation. That server crisis had threatened to crash their entire platform during peak usage hours, potentially costing millions in revenue and thousands of jobs. Sarah had smiled and told him to handle it, seeming understanding and supportive. He'd never suspected she felt abandoned and humiliated. "Is everything all right with the car?" Sarah asked, genuine concern creeping into her voice as Michael stepped out into the driving rain, ostensibly to check under the hood. "Just need to look at something quickly," Michael lied, standing behind the vehicle while he tried to regain his composure. The cold rain soaked through his borrowed jacket as he watched traffic splash past, each set of headlights blurring through his tears. 8 years of marriage, and he'd been completely blind to his wife's emotional death. When he returned to the driver's seat, soaked and shivering, Sarah immediately handed him several tissues from her designer purse. "You look really upset. Are you okay? Is it serious car trouble?" The simple act of kindness, something she hadn't shown him in months, nearly destroyed his carefully maintained composure. "No, the car's fine. I'm just dealing with some relationship troubles of my own, and your story hit pretty close to home. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Here I am, selfishly dumping all my marital problems on you when you're obviously going through your own difficult situation," Sarah said, her voice filled with the genuine empathy that had made him fall in love with her in college. Michael started the engine and carefully pulled back onto the highway, his mind racing. Sometimes it actually helps to hear other people's stories. Makes you realize you're not completely alone in struggling with these things. "Are you married too?" Sarah asked softly. 8 years, Michael replied, the truth carrying the full weight of their shared history. "Any children?" "We've been trying for 5 years now," he answered honestly, the words carrying all the pain of their 3 devastating miscarriages that had driven them into separate corners of grief and blame and misplaced guilt. Sarah leaned forward slightly in her seat. "I'm truly sorry. That must be incredibly difficult to go through together. The hardest part is feeling like we're handling it completely differently, like we're on different planets about something so important," Michael said, finally voicing thoughts he'd never been able to share with anyone. "She processes grief by shutting down emotionally, building walls to protect herself. I handle it by trying to fix everything, by working harder to provide security, by being more present. But somehow that just seems to push her further away from me." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a new understanding. Maybe she's just protecting herself from more potential pain. When you lose something you want that desperately over and over again, sometimes it feels safer to stop wanting anything at all, to stop hoping for things that might never happen. Michael's throat tightened with emotion. "Is that what happened in your marriage? You stopped wanting things?" "I stopped wanting things from him because asking felt like begging," Sarah replied with brutal honesty. "I'd rather have nothing at all than ask for scraps of attention and affection from someone who clearly sees me as just another obligation to manage efficiently. But what if he doesn't see it that way at all? What if he's just lost and scared, trying to provide for you and protect you the only way he knows how?" Sarah's reflection in the mirror looked deeply skeptical. Providing money and security isn't the same thing as providing love and emotional connection. "I would rather live in a tiny studio apartment with someone who actually talks to me and sees me as a real person than live in a mansion with someone who treats me like expensive furniture." As they entered the affluent suburb of Oak Brook, with its perfectly manicured lawns and enormous houses set back from tree-lined streets, Sarah grew noticeably quieter. Michael could see her mentally preparing to return to her carefully constructed public persona, the successful architect's wife who appeared to have everything together, whose life looked perfect from the outside. But here in this car, with this anonymous stranger who would never see her again, she'd been more honest and vulnerable than she'd been in years of marriage counseling and forced conversations with her actual husband. "Can I ask you something personal?" Michael said as they approached the country club where her book club gathered monthly to discuss literature and share carefully edited versions of their lives. "Of course. After everything I've shared tonight, I think personal questions are fair game. If your husband could somehow hear everything you just told me, every word, every feeling, every disappointment, what would you want him to do with that information?" Sarah considered this question very carefully, staring out at the elegant country club grounds. "I'd want him to fight for us instead of just throwing money at problems and hoping they disappear. I'd want him to choose me over his phone, even just once. I'd want him to really see me. Not just the woman who keeps his social calendar organized and looks appropriate at business functions, but me as a real person with thoughts and feelings and dreams that matter. And if he really tried? If he genuinely tried to change and rebuild what you had? I honestly don't know, Sarah admitted with heartbreaking vulnerability. I've built so many protective walls around my heart over the past few years. I'm not sure I'd even know how to tear them down anymore, or if I'd have the courage to risk that kind of pain again. Michael pulled up to the country club's circular driveway, his heart hammering against his chest as the moment of separation approached. Sarah gathered her designer purse and reached for the door handle, then paused and turned back toward him. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with genuine gratitude, for listening, without judgment, for caring about a complete stranger's problems when you have your own difficulties to deal with. "We're all fighting battles that nobody else knows about," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes we just need someone to witness our pain and tell us we're not crazy for feeling it." Sarah smiled then, the first completely genuine smile he'd seen from her in months. "You're incredibly wise for an Uber driver. Your wife is lucky to have someone who thinks so deeply about relationships. Life teaches you things regardless of what your job title says," Michael managed. She hesitated with her hand on the door handle. "I really hope things work out with your wife. 8 years of history is definitely worth fighting for, even when it feels hopeless." "Is it really?" Michael asked desperately. "Even if she's already given up completely?" Sarah looked directly at him then, and for just a moment Michael thought she might recognize something familiar in his eyes behind the fake mustache and baseball cap. Instead, she said something that would change everything. "Love isn't just a feeling that happens to you. It's a choice you make every single day, sometimes every single hour. If you both choose to fight for it, there's always hope. But it has to be both people choosing." Sarah closed the car door gently and walked toward the country club's elegant entrance, leaving Michael alone with the devastating weight of her words and the crushing knowledge of how completely he'd failed the woman he loved more than his own life. He sat in the circular driveway for nearly 30 minutes, watching through the tall windows as Sarah joined her book club, immediately becoming animated and engaged in ways she never was at home anymore. This was who she'd become when he wasn't around, the vibrant, intelligent, passionate woman he'd fallen in love with at Northwestern University. She was still there, that incredible person, but she'd learned to hide her true self from the man who was supposed to know her better than anyone else in the world. His phone buzzed repeatedly with new ride requests, but Michael ignored them all. Instead, he called his assistant Marcus in New York, knowing it was nearly midnight there. "Marcus, it's Michael. I need you to cancel every single meeting for the rest of this week, and probably next week too." "Sir, the Patterson investor presentation is tomorrow morning at 9. The Tokyo investors flew in specifically for this meeting. We're talking about $40 million in potential funding. Reschedule everything. I don't care what it costs in penalties or rescheduling fees or lost opportunities. Is everything all right? This is completely unlike you." Michael looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, at the ridiculous fake mustache and borrowed clothes that had revealed more truth about his marriage than 8 years of living together. "I'm about to find out if I can save the most important thing in my life before it's too late." He drove home slowly through the rain-soaked streets, his mind racing with plans. The penthouse felt completely different when he walked in, less like a home where love lived, more like an expensive museum displaying the artifacts of their failed marriage. Awards and photos from business events lined the walls, but there were no recent pictures of him and Sarah together, laughing or touching or looking happy. In his home office, surrounded by symbols of professional success that suddenly felt meaningless, he began making the phone calls that would dismantle the life that had cost him his wife's love. First, he called his business partner David. "I need to step back from day-to-day operations immediately. Michael, we're in the middle of the biggest expansion in company history. This is not the time for—" "I know exactly what we're in the middle of. I also know what I'm about to lose forever if I don't change everything about my priorities right now." At 2 in the morning, Michael finally removed his disguise and sat staring at their wedding photo on his desk. He had 3 days before Sarah expected him home from his fabricated business trip. 3 days to figure out how to become the man worthy of the woman who'd poured her heart out to a stranger, not knowing that stranger would move heaven and earth for just one more chance to hear her laugh the way she used to. But first, he had a confession to make and a marriage to save. If it wasn't already too late, if the walls around her heart weren't already too high to climb. Tomorrow, he would begin the most important project of his life, winning back the only success that had ever truly mattered. 3 days later, Sarah stood at their floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Lake Michigan's waves crash against the shore 40 floors below. Michael's business trip had been extended twice, something about complications with the New York investors that required his immediate attention. She'd stopped caring about the details months ago, accepting that his work would always take priority over their relationship, over her needs, over any semblance of genuine partnership. Her iPhone buzzed with a text from her younger sister, Emma. "Dinner tonight? You sounded really strange and distant when we talked yesterday. I'm worried about you." Sarah typed back quickly. "Can't tonight. Michael's finally coming home and we desperately need to have a serious conversation about our future." The truth was, she'd made a life-altering decision during his absence. The conversation with that kind Uber driver had crystallized something that had been building in her heart for months, maybe even years. She couldn't continue living as a ghost in her own marriage, couldn't keep pretending that financial security was an adequate substitute for emotional connection and genuine intimacy. At exactly 6 p.m., she heard Michael's key turning in their front door. He walked into their spacious living room carrying a single red rose, her favorite flower from their college days at Northwestern, something he hadn't brought her in over 3 years. The gesture felt simultaneously touching and inadequate. "Hi," he said quietly, studying her face with unusual intensity that made her feel suddenly self-conscious. "How was New York?" Sarah asked automatically, though she was immediately struck by something fundamentally different in his demeanor. He seemed nervous, almost vulnerable in a way she hadn't witnessed since their early dating years when he'd been unsure of her feelings. "Actually, I need to tell you something important about that trip," Michael said, setting down his expensive leather briefcase and walking toward her with deliberate slowness. "I wasn't in New York. Sarah, I haven't been there at all." She frowned deeply, confusion replacing her prepared resignation. "What do you mean? You sent me photos from your hotel, texted me about meetings. I mean, I've been in Chicago the entire time. I lied about the business trip because I needed to do something desperate, and I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to follow through if you knew what I was planning." Sarah's confusion deepened into something approaching alarm. "Michael, what are you talking about? What did you do?" He reached into his jacket pocket with trembling hands and pulled out a baseball cap, a fake mustache, and what looked like a receipt from a costume shop. "3 nights ago, I was your Uber driver. I heard absolutely everything you said to me." The world tilted violently beneath her feet. Sarah grabbed the back of their Italian leather sofa for support as the full implications crashed over her like a tsunami. What? That's impossible. I've been desperate to understand why you've been pulling away from me for months. Marriage counseling with Dr. Peterson wasn't working. You wouldn't talk to me directly about anything meaningful, so I created this elaborate plan to pick you up as a complete stranger, thinking maybe you'd finally open up to someone you'd never see again. Sarah's face cycled rapidly through shock, dawning realization, and then something that looked like profound betrayal. "You spied on me? You deliberately tricked and manipulated me into confessing my most private feelings?" "Yes," Michael said simply, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his admission. "And it was the most important thing I've ever done in my entire life, because it saved our marriage." "Saved our marriage?" Sarah's voice rose to near shouting. "You violated my privacy. You manipulated me into telling a stranger who wasn't actually a stranger things I would never have had the courage to say to your face." Michael stepped closer, his eyes intense. "You're absolutely right. What I did was wrong, manipulative, a complete violation of your trust. It was desperate and unethical, and I crossed every possible boundary. But Sarah, if I hadn't done it, would you have ever told me the truth? Would you have ever told me about our anniversary dinner, about feeling invisible in your own marriage, about giving up hope for us?" Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling as she processed the elaborate deception. "That's not the point, Michael. You lied to me. I've been lying to myself for years," Michael replied with devastating honesty. "Telling myself that working 18-hour days was how I demonstrated love, that providing financial security was sufficient, that you just needed space and time to grieve our losses. But you were dying emotionally inside our marriage, and I was too blind and self-absorbed to see it happening." He pulled out his iPhone and showed her his recent call log, which was filled with canceled meetings and rescheduled appointments. "I've spent the last 3 days systematically dismantling everything I thought was important. I called David and told him I'm stepping back from daily operations immediately. I canceled $40 million in investor meetings. I restructured my entire role in the company we built together." Sarah looked at the phone screen, then back at his face, searching for signs of deception. "Why would you do that?" Your company is everything to you. Because 3 nights ago my wife told a stranger that she'd rather live in a tiny studio apartment with someone who actually sees her as a human being than in a mansion with someone who treats her like expensive furniture. And she was talking about me. Sarah walked to the window, turning her back to him as she struggled to process this revelation. I can't believe you actually did this. I trusted that driver with my deepest, most painful feelings because I thought I'd never see him again. I thought it was completely safe to be vulnerable. It was the only situation where you felt safe enough to tell the complete truth, Michael said quietly. When was the last time you told me how you really felt about anything important? Not what you thought I wanted to hear, not what was diplomatically convenient. When did you last trust me with your genuine emotions? Sarah was silent for a long moment, staring out at the lake. I stopped trusting you with my feelings when you made it crystal clear that your work was infinitely more important than my emotional pain. The miscarriages, Michael said, his voice breaking slightly. After the 3rd one last year, I needed you desperately. I needed you to grieve with me, to stay home and just be sad together, to acknowledge that we'd lost something precious. Instead, you threw yourself into work even harder than before. You said you were building our future and providing security, but it felt like you were running away from our present reality as fast as possible. Michael's throat tightened with emotion and regret. I didn't know how to help you through that pain. I felt completely powerless watching you hurt, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I tried to fix our financial security to make sure we'd never have to worry about anything else ever again. But I needed you, not your money or your solutions. I needed my husband to sit with me in the darkness and cry, not my provider to work overtime to distract himself from my grief and his own inability to fix what was broken. You're absolutely right, Michael said. I failed you catastrophically when you needed me most. And then I compounded that failure by not seeing how far away you drifted, how much emotional distance you'd put between us for self-protection. Sarah turned back to face him, her expression complex. The Uber driver thing. It's completely insane, Michael. It's manipulative and wrong and a massive violation of trust, and I should probably be furious with you and pack my bags immediately. But, Michael asked hopefully, but it's also the first time in years that you've done something that showed you were actually paying attention to me as a person. The first time you've taken a real risk to understand how I feel, instead of just assuming you knew what was best for both of us. Michael stepped closer carefully. What you said about love being a choice, you're absolutely right. I've been choosing work over you for years, telling myself it was for your benefit and our future. But it was really for me because work was easier and more predictable than dealing with real emotions and genuine intimacy. And now? What's different now? Now I choose you. Every day, every decision, every phone call that rings during dinner, every weekend emergency, every urgent meeting. I choose you over all of it. Sarah studied his face intently. You said you restructured the company. What does that actually mean? It means David is now CEO. I'm chairman of the board, which means I'll attend monthly board meetings and consult on major strategic decisions. But I'm completely removed from daily operations, crisis management, and the constant demands that kept me away from you. Michael, that company is your life's work. It's your identity. No, he said firmly. You are my life's work. The company was supposed to be a means to an end, giving us financial freedom to build an incredible life together. Instead, it became the thing that systematically destroyed our life together. Sarah sat down heavily on their leather sofa, looking emotionally and physically exhausted. I need time to process all of this, the betrayal and manipulation, but also the fact that it actually worked. You learned more about how I truly feel in one car ride than in months of expensive marriage counseling sessions. Michael sat across from her, deliberately not presuming to get closer without permission. Dr. Peterson said we were going through the motions of trying to save our marriage. She was absolutely right. I was performing the role of a concerned husband, while you were performing the role of a cooperative wife trying to save something that might already be dead. When did we become such accomplished actors in our own lives? Sarah asked sadly. When the truth became too scary and painful to share safely. Sarah looked at him with new intensity. If we're going to have any chance of fixing this disaster, really rebuilding instead of just patching up the obvious holes, we need to establish a new foundation of complete honesty. No more lies, no more careful performances, no more protecting each other from difficult conversations that might hurt feelings. Agreed completely. Starting right now, this moment. Okay, here's my absolute truth. I don't know if I'm still in love with you anymore. I know I love you, You're part of my history, my foundation, my formative experiences. But being in love, that spark of excitement, that anticipation about building a future together, I honestly don't know if it still exists or if it's been buried under too much disappointment. The words hit Michael like a physical blow to his chest, but he forced himself to stay present and engaged, instead of retreating into damage control mode. Thank you for telling me that. I know it was difficult to say. Your turn, complete honesty. Michael took a deep breath, steeling himself. My truth is that I've been absolutely terrified of losing you, but my fear made me do exactly the things that guaranteed I'd push you away. Every time you seemed sad or distant, I'd work harder and longer, thinking professional success would somehow fix our emotional problems. I turned into exactly the kind of man I used to mock, the guy who thinks money and achievements solve relationship issues. What else? Don't hold back. I'm scared that even if we somehow manage to fix this, we'll never have the children we dreamed about for so many years. I'm scared that my workaholic behavior has permanently damaged your ability to trust me with your heart, and I'm terrified that the woman who fell in love with me in college is gone forever, replaced by someone who's learned to protect herself from the man who was supposed to cherish her. Sarah's expression softened slightly. She's not gone completely. She's just buried under years of accumulated disappointment and loneliness. But Michael, even if we could dig her out and resurrect her, she wouldn't be the same person. Neither of us would be the naive kids we were. I know. I'm not trying to go backward to who we used to be. I'm trying to go forward with who we are now, with everything we've learned and lost and survived. The Uber deception, Sarah said. How long had you been planning something that elaborate? Weeks of preparation? I researched everything obsessively. Got the fake mustache from a professional costume shop. Practiced the working-class accent for hours. Learned your book club schedule by heart. Studied Uber's driver app system. I even watched YouTube videos about being a convincing rideshare driver. That's actually kind of impressive in its thoroughness and attention to detail. It was either that level of commitment or lose you completely without ever understanding why I'd failed so spectacularly. Sarah was quiet for several long minutes, processing everything. There's something I need to tell you too, something I've been hiding that you deserve to know. Michael waited, his heart racing. After our third miscarriage 18 months ago, I started seeing a therapist individually, Dr. Martinez. I've been seeing her for 8 months without telling you. You have? Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed someone completely separate from our marriage to talk to about my grief, about our relationship problems, about feeling like I was disappearing inside my own life. She's the one who helped me realize that I'd stopped fighting for us because fighting felt completely pointless. What did Dr. Martinez say about our marriage? Michael asked, dreading the answer. That I had two clear choices. Find a way to communicate my needs clearly and directly to you, giving you a real chance to change, or accept that the marriage was over and start planning my exit strategy accordingly. Michael's blood turned to ice. Exit strategy? I've been seeing a divorce attorney for preliminary consultations. Michael, nothing has been filed officially, no papers have been signed. But I needed to understand what my legal and financial options would be if things didn't change dramatically between us. The revelation hung in the air between them like a bomb that had just detonated, filling their expensive penthouse with the acrid smoke of potential destruction. Michael felt the walls closing in, the weight of how close he'd come to losing everything crushing down on his chest. How close were you to actually filing? He managed to ask through his constricted throat. Very close, devastatingly close. I had an appointment scheduled for this Friday to begin the formal paperwork and start the process of dissolving our marriage. Had? Past tense? I canceled it this morning after your text saying you were coming home early from New York. I decided to give you one final chance to fight for us, to show me that our marriage was worth saving. Michael's hands were visibly shaking now. What would have happened if I'd come home tonight with the usual routine? Flowers and superficial apologies and empty promises to do better without any real changes. I would have served you with divorce papers next Tuesday. My attorney had them prepared and ready to file. The stark honesty was devastating, but also somehow liberating. They were finally talking about reality instead of dancing around the truth with polite euphemisms and careful language. Sarah, I need you to understand that everything I've done these past 3 days, walking away from the company, restructuring my entire professional life, dismantling my workaholic identity, I did all of it before I knew about the divorce attorney. I didn't do it to manipulate you or because I was scared of losing money in a divorce settlement. I did it because I finally understood that I'd been choosing the wrong life entirely. Tell me about these changes specifically. I need details. Michael pulled out his phone and opened his notes app, which was filled with detailed documentation. I documented everything so you'd know I was completely serious about rebuilding our relationship. David is now CEO with full operational authority. I'm chairman of the board, which means I'll attend monthly board meetings and consult on major strategic decisions that affect the company's future. But I'm completely removed from daily operations, crisis management, and the constant emergencies that kept me away from home. That's a massive professional step backward. It's a massive step forward toward the life I actually want to live with you. I restructured my compensation package to reduce my base salary by 70%, but I maintain significant equity stakes that will provide long-term financial security without requiring daily involvement or constant availability. Sarah leaned forward, clearly shocked. You took a 70% pay cut voluntarily? We don't need that money, Sarah. We need time together. We need emotional bandwidth for each other. We need me to be mentally and physically present for our life together, instead of constantly managing other people's professional problems and crises. What about your identity? You've been CEO for 8 years. That company represents your life's work, your professional reputation, everything you've built. My identity became so completely wrapped up in professional success that I forgot who I was as a human being, as a husband, as a partner in this marriage. I want to remember what it feels like to have conversations that don't revolve around quarterly projections and market analysis and competitive positioning. Sarah stood and walked to their bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of novels they'd once discussed together during long, lazy Sunday afternoons. Do you remember what we used to talk about when we were dating in college? Everything imaginable. Books and philosophy and current events, dreams about traveling together to exotic places, hypothetical children's names, what kind of house we'd want to design and build together someday. When did we stop having those kinds of conversations? When I started believing that providing for our financial future was more important than enjoying our emotional present. Sarah pulled out a leather photo album from behind the books, something Michael hadn't seen her touch in over 2 years. She opened it carefully to a picture from their honeymoon in Tuscany, both of them laughing at something off camera, looking completely carefree and deeply in love. Look at your face in this picture, she said softly, holding it where he could see. You look completely relaxed, completely present in the moment. When was the last time I saw that expression on your face? Michael studied the photo, remembering that perfect afternoon in a hillside vineyard. I honestly don't remember. It's been years. That's the man I fell in love with originally. Not the successful CEO, not the financial provider, not the problem solver who had an answer for everything. The man who could spend an entire afternoon debating whether we'd rather have the ability to fly or be invisible. Fly, Michael said automatically, the memory rushing back. You always said invisible because you wanted to observe people without being judged. But I said fly because I wanted to see the world from a completely different perspective. Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time all evening. You actually remember those conversations. I remember everything about those talks. I just forgot that they mattered infinitely more than any business meeting I've ever attended, any deal I've ever negotiated. The question is, can we get back to being people who have those kinds of conversations again? Not the naive kids we were, but the adults we are now, with everything we've learned and lost and gained. Michael closed the photo album gently and looked directly into her eyes. I want to try. I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to become worthy of those conversations again. There's something else we need to address directly, Sarah said, her expression becoming more serious. If we're going to do this, really try to rebuild instead of just patching up the obvious problems, we need to talk honestly about children. Michael's stomach clenched with familiar pain. Okay, I'm ready. I can't go through another miscarriage while feeling like I'm grieving alone. If we decide to keep trying to have biological children, you have to promise me that if we lose another baby, you won't disappear into work as an escape mechanism. You'll grieve with me, not away from me. I promise completely. But Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be brutally honest with me. What? Do you still want to have children with me? Not with the idea of me, not with the man you married 8 years ago, but with who I am right now today sitting here in front of you. Sarah considered this question very carefully, taking her time. A week ago, I would have said absolutely not. The thought of bringing an innocent child into a home where the parents were essentially polite roommates felt selfish and potentially damaging. And now I see that you're genuinely capable of change, of choosing differently when the stakes are high enough. But Michael, wanting children isn't sufficient. We have to be emotionally solid first. We have to rebuild trust and intimacy and genuine partnership before we can even consider adding a child to this equation. How long do you think that rebuilding process would realistically take? I don't know. Maybe a full year of really working on ourselves and our relationship. Maybe longer if we discover deeper issues. Are you prepared for that timeline? Michael nodded without hesitation. I'm prepared for whatever timeline it takes to do this right. I'm 32. You're 29. We have time to build a foundation strong enough to support a family. What if we can't have biological children? What if the miscarriages were nature's way of telling us it's not meant to happen for us? Then we explore other options that feel right to both of us. Adoption, surrogacy, whatever path leads to the family we want, but only after we're absolutely solid as a couple again. Sarah studied his face intently. You'd really be okay with not having biological children if that's how things work out? I'd be devastated if I lost you while obsessively pursuing biological children. I want to be a father someday, but I want to be your husband first and foremost. They sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, both processing the enormous weight of their honest conversation and the magnitude of the commitment they were considering. I have non-negotiable conditions, Sarah said finally, her voice steady and determined. Tell me everything. First, we continue marriage counseling with Dr. Peterson, but we also both commit to individual therapy. I want you to understand why you used work to avoid emotional pain, and I want to understand why I chose silence over healthy conflict resolution. Agreed completely. Second, we start completely over with physical and emotional intimacy. No assumptions about what we used to be to each other. No expectations based on our history. We date again, we court each other again. We rebuild connection from the absolute ground up. What does that look like practically? Separate bedrooms for now, until intimacy feels natural and genuine instead of obligatory. Scheduled date nights where phones are completely off and work is never discussed. Strict time limits on business conversations at home. Planned activities that have nothing to do with your company or my career. Michael felt a flicker of panic at the separate bedrooms, but he understood the necessity. How long do you think that phase would last? Until it feels completely natural to be close again? Until I stop feeling like I have to perform happiness for your benefit, or worry that you're just going through the motions to keep me satisfied? And the third condition? Third, if at any point in the next year I feel like you're slipping back into old patterns, choosing work over us, avoiding difficult conversations, treating our relationship like a project to be managed, I'm done permanently. No more chances, no more marriage counseling, no more trying. I cannot emotionally survive another cycle of hope followed by disappointment. The ultimatum was terrifying but completely fair given their history. I understand completely and I accept those conditions. Do you really understand? Because this isn't about being perfect, Michael. It's about being present and honest, and consistently choosing us over everything else, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. I understand. And Sarah? Yes? Thank you for giving me this chance to prove I can be the husband you deserve. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your willingness to try again. You're right. You don't deserve it based on past performance. But maybe we both deserve the chance to discover who we could be together if we actually tried with complete commitment. 6 months later, Michael sat in the same coffee shop where he and Sarah had shared their first official date 12 years earlier, as nervous college students. She was running 10 minutes late, a habit that used to frustrate his obsessively punctual nature but now felt endearing, a reminder that not everything in life needed to be scheduled and optimized for maximum efficiency. When she walked through the door, laughing at something on her phone before immediately putting it away to be present with him, Michael felt the same flutter in his chest that he'd experienced as a 20-year-old. But this time it was deeper, more complex, earned through months of difficult conversations and deliberate choices. Sorry, she said, sliding into the booth across from him with a genuine smile. Emma called with her latest wedding planning drama, and I couldn't get off the phone politely. How's your family handling our reconciliation? Michael asked. Cautiously optimistic. Emma thinks you're trying too hard to be perfect. Mom thinks I'm being too forgiving too quickly. Dad just wants us to be genuinely happy. What do you think? Sarah smiled warmly. I think we're fundamentally different people than we were a year ago, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Their individual therapy had been revelatory and transformative. Michael had discovered that his workaholic tendencies stemmed from childhood fears of not being valuable unless he was constantly producing something useful. Sarah had learned that her conflict avoidance came from watching her parents' marriage implode when she was 12, making her terrified that any serious argument might signal the end of everything. Dr. Peterson says we're making remarkable progress, Sarah continued, because we're actually doing the emotional work now, instead of just going through the motions of trying to save something we weren't sure was worth saving. They'd been dating again for 4 months, taking things slower and more deliberately than even when they were inexperienced college students. Dinner dates where they talked about books and current events instead of work obligations. Weekend trips to places they'd never explored together. Long walks where they practiced being fully present with each other, instead of constantly planning the future or rehashing past disappointments. I have something important to tell you, Sarah said, her expression becoming more serious but not worried. Michael's stomach clenched slightly, old fears surfacing despite months of progress. Good something or concerning something? Good something, I think. Great something, maybe. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. It's not what you think it is. Michael opened it carefully to find a key. Old-fashioned brass, clearly antique and beautiful. It's the key to our house, Sarah said softly. What house? The one I put an offer on yesterday. The one I want us to buy together and make into our real home if you're interested. Michael stared at the key, processing. You bought a house without telling me? I put an offer on a house after talking to you about it extensively for 3 weeks. You said multiple times that you wanted us to have a place that felt like ours, not just the penthouse you bought as a real estate investment. She was absolutely right. He'd mentioned wanting a real home repeatedly, but he'd assumed it was theoretical future planning. Where is it? 20 minutes north of the city. 4 bedrooms, enormous kitchen perfect for cooking together, front porch with rocking chairs overlooking a small lake, room for children someday, if that's still something we both want. Michael looked at her face, seeing excitement and nervousness in equal measure. You really want to leave the penthouse? I want to build something completely new with you, somewhere we choose together, design together, fill with memories that belong to both of us instead of just you. What about your book club? They're all jealous that I'm getting out of the city. 3 of them are already asking about visiting our lake house for weekend retreats. Michael laughed. Our lake house? If you say yes. He studied the antique key, then looked at the woman across from him, his wife, his dating partner, his co-conspirator in rebuilding their life together from scratch. Yes, he said without hesitation. Absolutely, completely yes. Sarah grinned. Really? Really? When do we move? Next month? If the inspection goes well and financing gets approved. And when do I get to see it? Right now, if you want. I thought we could drive out there together, walk through it hand in hand, start planning how we want to arrange our new life. Michael stood and offered his hand. Let's go build our future. As they walked out of the coffee shop together, Michael's phone buzzed with what was undoubtedly an urgent work email. Without even looking at the screen, he reached into his pocket and turned the phone completely off. Important? Sarah asked, noticing the gesture. Nothing's more important than this moment, he replied, and for the first time in years, he meant it with every fiber of his being. They drove north toward their new beginning, talking excitedly about paint colors and furniture arrangements and whether they wanted to plant a vegetable garden, building their tomorrow one genuine conversation at a time.